All right, welcome back, everybody. We're continuing with the Proto-Renaissance in Italy and with painting, specifically altarpiece paintings. Let's meet this big one by our next artist, also from the 13th century, Cimabue, called Madonna Enthroned with Angels and Prophets, from circa 1280 to 1290. So what you find here is an altarpiece similar to the St. Francis altarpiece. It's wood made from wood panels. It's got that same kind of pointed top that was pretty popular in kind of a medieval holdover. It measures, checking my notes here, almost 13 feet. So it's, again, meant to be large enough to be seen from a distance, behind an altar in a church or a chapel, that kind of thing. Was painted by Cimabue in Florence. So we'll be looking at a lot of art emerging out of that city. It's particularly when we get to the 15th century, it's going to be a major cultural center for the Renaissance. All right, same media as well, tempera and gold leaf. And you probably recognize very similar characteristics to the previous altarpiece, including emphasizing the main subject in the center of the composition. That's something we saw with St. Francis as well. And in this case, the subject of the painting is the Virgin Mary, or the Madonna, holding her new child, baby Jesus, on her lap. And whenever you see that term enthroned, it basically means that that subject is seated in a throne, almost like royalty, right? Maybe referencing her as heavenly royalty. Or holy. You know, it's kind of emphasizes her holiness, that she's more extraordinary than, you know, you and I in whatever ordinary chairs we're sitting in. One thing I wanted to also point out that's very common, that's kind of, again, another one of these kind of holdovers from the past in the ancient world, something called hierarchy of scale, which you see here in my PowerPoint slide, is a common go-to. It extends all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia. The Egyptians loved it, and it continued through the medieval world as well. And it's another way, again, of emphasizing the most important person in a composition through increasing their size in the composition. You might notice that Mary is quite large when compared to the figures around her. There are figures in the scene below and above. What I'm probably going to do right now is take away my screen here because I'm obliterating some of the painting here, but that's what hierarchy of scale is meaning like emphasizing the subject's importance through increasing their size and central placement as well. All right, let me see if I can get myself to disappear. I'm just tinkering with the medium here. Oh, no, it's just me now. Hello. All right, let's go back to the art. Okay, I think that's going to make it go away. All right, there's just a fourth little prophet down below here. So again, let me explain the composition and what's going on in terms of subject. We have a seated Madonna and child, essentially, enthroned. She's surrounded, again, that love of kind of central composition and then kind of a balanced, symmetrical arrangement of figures on either side. We saw that with the vignettes with St. Francis too. These are angels. Everybody gets a gold platter halo. That's another medieval kind of holdover continuing along with that gold background. Even little baby Jesus gets a tiny one. And then down below here are the prophets. The prophets are from the Old Testament, whereas Mary and Jesus are from the New Testament. So the Old Testament is the older part of the Bible, and prophets are they're holding these scrolls, right? This is how people kept documents in rolls of paper or scrolls, and they are there because they likely are associated with forecasting or prophesying that Jesus was going to come on the scene as the, you know, mankind's savior for his or her sins, that kind of thing. So that's why they are there. Now, what you find with Cimabue, which I know there are things that don't look naturalistic to you, including that hierarchy of scale. or maybe just the fact that these angels are so, they lack individualization. They're just kind of clones of one another. Or maybe that these, miniature men down below are really out of scale to everybody else, or almost the size of baby Jesus himself. So some of it's kind of clunky, right? At the same time, we have an artist who's trying to endeavor to do something more naturalistic at the same time. It's tiny little baby steps, but he's getting there. The first thing that he does is you find that he creates these concave steps. Do you see how they're kind of semi-circular of her throne? It's meant to kind of convey a recession of space, as she would step up and then take a seat in her throne, along with the slight diagonal turn inward of the arms of her throne. All of that is meant to almost create the illusion of depth. And ordinarily we know would be a flat two-dimensional artwork, right? The other thing he does, Cimbue, is where the prophets are located, it looks like a little cubby or a room underneath her throne, right? It looks like they're inhabiting a space when they're unfurling their documents. I know, it's clunky to the modern eye. It's not convincing to the modern eye, but it still shows the thought process, the intent on the part of Cimbue, wanting to make you believe that they inhabit a space, a container of space. And it's just a little bit of interest, again, on the part of the artist in rendering an illusion of depth. The other thing you start to see is an interest in human anatomy. And again, we're not fully realized there yet, but Mary does look more proportional than St. Francis did with his stretched out body and teeny tiny head, right? And her head casts a little bit of a shadow. So there's a little bit of modeling to give the illusion of volume, like you believe that her face is round. Same with baby Jesus. And then the other thing Cimbue does is he has Mary elevate one of her feet on the upper steps, and he describes that knee poking out. She's fully clothed, right, appropriately for the Virgin Mary, but he's showing how the fabric drapes across the body, whereas maybe St. Francis, we couldn't even tell what was under his robe, anatomically speaking, at all. This is a choice that was common among the ancient Greeks and Romans. It's more naturalistic. Our clothing clings to our body, right? And that's what we see here. Even little baby Jesus has a knee hiked up here, and you can see the spill of folds described hugging his body too. So this is what I'm talking about. This is the beginning of a very rapid path towards increasing interest in the human body and naturalism. Now, let's get to our next artist here and see what he does with the pretty much 90% the same subject. And this artist is actually considered, advance my slide here, the first artist of the Renaissance. I know, and we'll see a couple of artworks by him in this video and in our last video coming up after this one you should click on. His name is Giotto, and this is a very similar altarpiece, same media, tempera and gold leaf on wood panel, and it's called the Madonna Enthroned from the All Saints altarpiece. And what I'm showing you is just the center of the altarpiece. It also has wings, but we're just going to focus on the Madonna Enthroned panel from that multi-panel altarpiece. It's a little bit smaller. She's about 11 feet in height, but still pretty big. And what you find here, very similar use of some of these kind of old ways of doing things, right? You've got that medieval gold leaf backdrop. Everybody's got those gold, gold platter halos. There's use of hierarchy of scale you might recognize in central placement of the most important subject, Mary and her new baby Jesus on her lap. Even her throne is super medieval Gothic. It's got these points to it that sort of, would have been trending, especially in the previous century. But, Giotto's kind of continuing those kind of decorative aesthetics that are more medieval than anything else. Yet at the same time, and again, that's symmetrical arrangements of figures on either side, yet at the same time, he too is beginning to be curious about how do I make the Virgin Mary and my paintings more relatable, you know? And so even though he's still got this otherworldly gold backdrop and that kind of thing going on, what you find here is compared to Giotto's Madonna, let's go back to her real quick, what a skinny mini she is, right? This woman, I mean, this is like an Italian version of the Virgin Mary. This is a Virgin Mary who goes out for pizza and gelato, you know, on a weekend. She's got a more believable sense of weight. You know, she really sits in that throne. She's not just sort of floating. She's got, again, a relatable physique. And like Cimbue, Giotto plays with a recession of steps on the throne to give you a sense that she is sitting back into the painting in a throne. The throne itself looks like a little phone booth, right? It's got a roof over her head or a little cove ceiling that implies kind of like those little prophets in the previous altarpiece, like a little container for her to occupy. He plays with the knee poking out as well of her kind of signature blue robe. She often wears blue, and plays with even more detail with shadows and highlights. Basically, artists model their figures with shadows and highlights to convince you of roundness, that she has volume, an illusion of mass and volume. So you can see that delineating her jawline, her eye sockets, her bust, that knee poking out. You believe that there's a body under all that fabric, right? Same with baby Jesus. In fact, his robe is kind of translucent. And that two-finger gesture is a blessing gesture, by the way. That's what that means. So again, with the beautiful decorative details, I just love the translucency of her veil across her brow. You have an artist now who also is on the quest to bring more increasing naturalism to his holy art and his holy figures. And this is the way they go about it. It's baby steps, but it's beginning with giving their holy figures more physical, physical naturalism, and then having them eventually, we're going to see them contextualize in relatable settings as well. By the way, does baby Jesus look like a famous congressman? To me, he looks a lot like Burbank Congressman Adam Schiff. I wonder if you agree with that as well. Don't worry, babies are going to look like babies pretty soon. That's coming up later. But for the time being, they look a little adult, don't they? He looks a little wise beyond his years, which might be some of the goal of art at this time. All right, just checking my notes to make sure I've covered all the points I wanted to cover here. All right, so this kind of naturalism is definitely more aligned with what the Greco-Roman world was about. And so Giotto is considered sort of the first artist of the Renaissance because he turns towards looking at those ambitions, more Greco-Roman sensibilities of naturalism more than any artist of the Proto-Renaissance. So that's why he gets points. And we'll see why he gets major points in my next video on his program of frescoes in the Arena Chapel. So click on that mini video lecture next, and we'll wrap up the Proto-Renaissance in Italy.